Being here with you brings back a flood of memories. I remember the first time I arrived on campus as an incoming law student in the fall of 1969, wearing my bell-bottoms, driving a beat-up old car with a mattress tied to the roof. I had no idea what to expect. Now, to be honest, I had had some trouble making up my mind between Yale and Harvard law schools. Then one day, while we were still in that period of decision-making, I was invited to a cocktail party at Harvard for potentially incoming law students, where I met a famous law professor. A friend of mine, a male law student, introduced me to this famous law professor. I mean, truly, big three-piece suit, watch chain. And my friend said, Professor, this is Hillary Rodham. She's trying to decide whether to come here next year or sign up with our closest competitor. Now, the great man gave me a cool, dismissive look and said, well, first of all, we don't have any close competitors. And secondly, we don't need any more women at Harvard. Now, I was leaning toward Yale anyway, but that pretty much sealed the deal. And when I came to Yale, I was one of 27 women out of 235 law students. It was the first year women were admitted to the college. And as that first class of women prepared to graduate 4 years later, the New York Times reported on Yale's foray into coeducation, noting that the women, quote, worked harder and got somewhat better grades than the 940 men graduating with them, a fact, they went on to say, that some of the men apparently found threatening. Well, I was shocked. But over the years, Yale has been a home away from home for me, a place I've returned to time and again. I spoke to Class Day back in 2001 on the 300th anniversary of the university. And I hope that that will be the case for many of you as well. This school has been responsible for some of my most treasured friends and colleagues, people like Jake Sullivan and Harold Coe, and I've watched some of you grow up, like Rebecca Shaw, who's graduating today, and you'll hear from shortly. And I've been honored to serve over the last year or two, working with some of the Yale Law School faculty, including the new dean, Heather Gerken. Now, Yale grads, many of whom are also here today, have worked for me in the United States Senate, the State Department, on my presidential campaigns, and I have been so well served. I have a very dedicated campaign intern here graduating, David Scheimer, the class of 2018. But I have to confess, of all the formative experiences I had at Yale, perhaps none was more significant than the day during my second year when I was cutting through what was then the student lounge with some friends. And I saw this tall, handsome guy with a beard who looked like a Viking. I said to my friend, well, who is that? And she said, well, that's Bill Clinton. He's from Arkansas, and that's all he ever talks about. And then as if on cue, I hear him saying, and not only that, we grow the biggest watermelons in the world. And I was like, who is this person? But, he kept looking at me, and I kept looking back. And so we were in the law library one night. I was studying. But I couldn't help but see, occasionally as I lifted my head up, that he was, again, looking at me. So finally I thought, this is ridiculous. So I got up, went over to him, and I said, if you're going to keep looking at me and I'm going to keep looking back, we at least ought to be introduced. I'm Hillary Rodham. Who are you? And that started a conversation that continued to this day. Now, it was also here at Yale that I saw a flyer in the law school on a bulletin board that changed my life. Now, some of your parents and grandparents may remember flyers and bulletin boards. For the rest of you, suffice it to say, that was how we got information. It was like Facebook, but the bulletin board didn't steal your personal information. So, one day, I saw a note about a woman named Marian Wright Edelman, a Yale Law School graduate, civil rights activist, who would go on to found the Children's Defense Fund. Marian was coming back to campus to give a lecture. I went. I was captivated to hear her talk about using her Yale education to create a Head Start program in rural Mississippi. And I wound up working for her that summer, and the experience opened my eyes to the ways that the law can protect children or come up short. Because like many of you, I learned just as much outside the four walls of the classroom as I did sitting in a lecture hall. And I discovered a passion that has animated my life and my work ever since. Now, a lot has changed since I was here. In 2019, Yale will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the matriculation of women at the college and the 150th anniversary of the first women graduate students at Yale. And I heard that Yale officially changed the term freshman to first year. I also heard, amazingly, that the Duke's men and the Whiffenpoofs have started welcoming women. Now, as for my long-lost Whiffs audition tape, I have buried it so deep, not even WikiLeaks will be able to find it. Because if you thought my emails were scandalous, you should hear my singing voice. I find it very exciting that today's graduates hail from all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Guam, and 56 other countries. And in your 4 years on campus, you've survived late nights in the vast cubicles and early mornings in the Sterling stacks. You've trekked up Science Hill. Maybe you've even found love at the Last Chance dance. And now you're ready to take on your next adventure. But maybe some of you are reluctant to leave. I understand that. It's possible to feel both. Because the class of 2018 is graduating at one of the most tumultuous times in the history of our country. And I say that as someone who graduated in the 60s. I recently went back and looked up those famous lines from Charles Dickens in A Tale of Two Cities because, I usually end after saying it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. But it goes on. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. Now, Dickens was writing about the years leading up to the French Revolution, but he could have been describing the ricocheting highs and lows of this moment in America. We're living through a time when fundamental rights, civic virtue, freedom of the press, even facts and reason are under assault like never before. But we are also witnessing an era of new moral conviction, civic engagement, and a sense of devotion to our democracy and country. So here's the good news. If any group were ever prepared to rise to the occasion, it is you, the class of 2018. You've already demonstrated the character and courage that will help you navigate this tumultuous moment. And most of all, you've demonstrated resilience. Now that's a word that's been on my mind a lot recently. One of my personal heroes, Eleanor Roosevelt, said, "You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You are able to say to yourself, I have lived through this horror. I can take the next thing that comes along." Well, that's resilience. And it's so important because everyone gets knocked down. What matters is whether you get back up and keep going. This may be hard for a group of Yale soon-to-be graduates to accept, but yes, you will make mistakes in life. You will even fail. It happens to all of us, no matter how qualified or capable we are. Take it from me. Oh, I remember those first months after that 2016 election were not easy. We all had our own methods of coping. I went for long walks in the woods. Yale students went for long walks in East Rock Park. I spent hours going down a Twitter rabbit hole. You spent hours in the Yale memes group. I had my fair share of Chardonnay. You had penny drinks at Wode's. I practiced yoga and alternate nostril breathing. You took psych and the good life. And let me just get this out of the way. No, I'm not over it. I still think about the 2016 election. I still regret the mistakes I made. I still think, though, that understanding what happened in such a weird and wild election in American history will help us defend our democracy in the future. Whether you're right, left, center, Republican, Democrat, independent, vegetarian, whatever. We all have a stake in that. So today, as a person, I'm okay, but as an American, I'm concerned. You know, personal resilience is important, but it's not the only form of resilience we need right now. We also need community resilience. That's something that this class has embodied during your time on campus. Literally at times, like in the March of Resilience your sophomore year. It was the biggest demonstration in the history of the school. That's 300 plus years. Led by women of color, supported by students and faculty, determined to make Yale a more just, equitable, and safe place for everyone. Many of you have said that March was a defining moment in your college experience, and that says something about this class and your values. Because the truth is, our country is more polarized than ever. We have sorted ourselves into opposing camps, and that divides how we see the world. The data backs this up. There are more liberals and conservatives than there used to be, and fewer centrists. Our political parties are more ideologically and geographically consistent, which means there are fewer Northern Republicans and fewer Southern Democrats. And the divides on race and religion are starker than ever before. And as the middle shrank, partisan animosity grew. Now, I'm not going to get political here, but this isn't simply a both sides problem. The radicalization of American politics hasn't been symmetrical. There are leaders in our country who blatantly incite people with hateful rhetoric, who fear change, who see the world in zero-sum terms, so that if others are gaining, well, they must be losing. That's a recipe for polarization and conflict. Our social fabric is fraying, and the bonds of community that hold us together are fractured. This isn't just a problem because it leads to unpleasant conversations over the Thanksgiving dinner table. It's a problem because it undermines the civic spirit that makes democracy possible. The habits of the heart that de Tocqueville found so unique in the American character. I believe healing our country is going to take what I call radical empathy. As hard as it is, this is a moment to reach across divides of race, class, and politics. To try to see the world through the eyes of people very different from ourselves, and to return to rational debate, to find a way to disagree without being disagreeable, to try to recapture a sense of community and common humanity. When we think about politics and judge our leaders, we can't just ask, am I better off than I was 2 years or 4 years ago? we have to ask, are we all better off? Are we as a country better, stronger, and fairer? That's something you've done